I'll try to stick to the time. It's a pleasure to be here. My talk is about one of the topics that maybe was so far a little bit marginal, and it precisely is the relation between finance and the real economy. Go quick on acknowledgement. I'm very pleased to be part of the ISIGrowth, and I'd like to show you in this slide how the European Commission is actually financing a host of parallel lines of analysis. In particular, I'm coordinating Dolphins and Simple, who in synergy with ISIGrowth are bringing innovative analysis and tools for understanding implications for policy, in particular in finance and sustainability. So what I want to quickly, so what I actually want to convey today, also given the constraining time, I want to talk about narratives. And what I will try to convince you is that there exist alternative and coexisting narratives about finance and financial complexity, and whether this is good or bad. And my main argument is that it's neither good or bad in general. It's a technology, finance is a technology, and financial complexity is one of the things the aspects that arise from financial technologies, and it has to be handled with appropriate care. So there are legitimate questions, however, that should be asked and are not enough asked, and in particular in policymaking circles. And in particular regarding to some of the current debate in the policy discussion, quantitative easing and also the revival of securitization are actually silent about this existing slippery side of financial complexity. They're also silent about climate-related policies and how do we move to lower carbon transition economy. So let me start with just a couple of numbers. According to the most recent estimates, we have globally there is a in euro area is $500 billion subsidies to the brown energy. Globally is the sum of explicit and implicit subsidies to the brown energy sector amount to about 5% of global GDP. So it's an incredible, it's a substantial amount. There are similar numbers, interestingly, that are related to the subsidies to the financial sector in the sense of fiscal cost of directly assisting financial institutions. And there are these recent papers from both the ECB and the IMF. And we're talking about 5% of GDP as an order of magnitude, with lots of variation across countries, but basically that's the basic order of magnitude. If we compare with Mariana's statistics that she was showing about R&D compared to GDP, you understand that the sum of these two major subsidies to finance and brown energy are really a major issue. So what is the kind of school text narrative about the service of the financial sector, or the economic role of the financial sector? Well, it's essentially making supply and demand of funds meet. Supply is coming from households and demand is coming from the real sector. In that respect, typically, the larger the size of that sector and the interconnectedness, because that's what provides the liquidity, the better the ability to diversify the risk, to absorb shocks, and to drive growth. And this also connects to the conversation that we had before. Now, there is also a kind of, I would call it, data-driven narrative. If you read, for instance, Laura Turner's recent book, today's main business of the financial sector, banking sector in this case in particular, is essentially to fuel the growth of the real estate in cycles via creation of endogenous money, and with, you know, also consequences in terms of cyclic financial crisis. And another related conversation is about the fact that there are no sufficient patient, long-term, innovation-driven investments instead. And another related narrative is about the role and the implication of financial complexity. And this has to do with the fact that we need to recognize that increasing complex financial markets entails also uncertainty in the valuation of asset, because the value of my asset depends on the value of the asset of a counterparty, and there might be many counterparties in between. And under certain conditions, this can actually lead to information asymmetry, and hence possibility for emergence of market power, which is typically ruled out in most of the models, even in the models that we've been seeing dealt with today. I put there a pointer to an interesting conversation that is arising from the book of Akerlof and Schiller about the fishing for fools as actually equilibrium, economic equilibrium that we should expect to see, including in financial markets. And as Alan was mentioning before, there is a number of, an increasing number of recent cases in which financial institutions are caught in manipulation cases, and then the cost of being caught is becoming basically just one of the items in the calculation of whether to engage or not in a business. So traditionally, we need to realize that the concept of uncertainty is something that it has been the traditional focus of finance. So the idea is, well, most of finance has been focusing about how do I make a valuation of an asset ex ante, knowing that the claim will be actually will be maturing in the future, and I have some ideas about how things can go from now to then. But interestingly, the value of that asset is typically independent of the value of other assets. Okay? At least this is in the whole, in all of the standard approach on how you value assets. In fact, the focus on interdependence and the uncertainty that derive from that, which is a different type of uncertainty, is actually much more recent. Dates back to, of course, the early works on interaction and heterogeneity by Alan, and then the whole scientific community that was developing that further. And now, what you need to understand is that once you combine the two aspects, uncertainty and interconnectedness, well, then things are more difficult. And if you want to value today a set of interdependent claims without maturity in the future, it's not a trivial problem. And I'm depicting here an example from a micro perspective. This is illustrating three balance sheets of very simplified balance sheet of banks. They are lending to each other. There is, if you follow the red line, you will see that there is a cycle of lending. Bank 2 lends to Bank 1, who lends to Bank 3, and so on. They are all at the same time exposed to some external assets, say equity holding on the stock market, which, and this portfolio might be overlapping or not. And but even in this very simple setting, making evaluation and making an estimation of the default probability of these of each of the banks is actually not so trivial. And there is of course there is a lot of literature on how to go about this problem, but interestingly, what people don't realize, and I think it's an important information or it's an important point for both for policymakers practitioners and also for the Commission to see that this is actually an issue. Most of the stress testing analysis that is conducted, and you see there is a lot of literature here, but most of it is actually conducted taking out either uncertainty or the interdependence. And just to give you a flavor of the fact that the complexity is actually there, this is an illustration of empirical data from the global credit default swap market, and it's a representation in which each arrow has the exposure of an actor to another that is passing by risk. So agents are selling risk to each other, and you see that they are organized on the left are those who are selling the risk. That means they are buying protection. There is a whole group that are selling to each other risk. That means they're selling and buying protection. And then eventually some of them, or sometimes they're eventually selling to someone who is only buying. And the volume of what's happening inside is roughly 10 times the volume of what is actually sold in the end. So this is just one of the evidences that there's a lot of the things that are going on in finance precise justification in terms of the school text story is questionable. And if you look at the macro dimension, well, you can look, for instance, in the euro area, you can look at the stocks, financial stocks held by the various institutional sectors in the balance sheet of counterparties. And what I want to point you out here is that in the center you see MFI, monetary financial institutions. They hold a number of exposures between towards and from other of the institutional sectors. Notice one thing. On the left side, if you look at the asset composition, interbank is actually larger than loans to households, so it's 7 against 5 trillions, which in turn is larger than loans to non-financial corporations, NFC, which is 4. So this is to say that if you look at the business of banks, even in aggregate, and it would be even worse if you look at individual large banks, most of it is in finance itself, then housing, and only then lending to the real economy. And then when you look at and you zoom into the small chunk of loans to non-financial corporations, which is this data, then you can then look over time. What is the most of it is the yellow. What is the yellow? Real estate activities. Okay, so lending to the real economy in terms of other type of activities is a minor business, at least for banks. Then you can do all sorts of exercises. Now, for matter of time, I will only convey the main message. If you aggregate you can make a breakdown of the balance sheet of the major institutional sectors by type of instrument. You will notice there is bonds, equity holding, there's loans and deposits. A big chunk of that, in particular a big chunk of the holdings of financial institutional sectors are held, again, in other financial institutional sectors. So, then you can do all sort of specific analysis. Let me draw to the first wrap up on the empirical facts. The financial assets owned by the financial sectors are large in size. The data I've shown are regarding euro area, and not only financial actors own a big chunk of financial assets, but they are also investing them in the financial sector itself. So there is a strong interconnectedness of the financial systems on its own, both at the macro level and also at the micro level, as the example that I've shown for the CDS market. you have similar things for interbank or simpler markets. And now there's a number of legitimate questions that arise. What are the implications for financial stability, macroprudential? Is it to fail a notion to be applied to the individual bank, or should we look at it as a collective notion? And there's a famous paper by Jean Tirole about collective moral hazard in the banking system. There is an issue of inequality. Who owns the claims on the returns on those? Clearly, depending on how much of the government bonds are owned, for instance, by commercial banks versus households, and someone was mentioning, in Japan, most of the public debt is held by households themselves. In other countries today, in Europe, the majority is actually held by commercial banks. So where are the returns from public debt going? It's connected to the issue of inequality. The issue of sustainability, well, depending on, if you ask the question who is influencing the allocation of those assets, then you immediately bounce into the question of brown versus green. How many seconds do I have? All right. So I have prepared a summary of theoretical results. I will not go to that, but let me just say one message. Most of the analysis of the financial system and the stability of the financial systems are based essentially, and the stress tests are based on one central approach, which is the famous ISIGrowth framework, which was intended as an initial work to then be further developed in the context of uncertainty and other aspects, which was never developed in that direction. And basically, it allows to find out who has to pay what and whom in case some banks default in a banking system. But essentially, the title is a vanishing hand. It looks like it's taking account of the whole complexity of the interbank network, but if you look at it in detail, and actually we discovered it only recently, in that system, the banking system is, in that model, the banking system is essentially equivalent to a single aggregate bank. So there is no complexity. And what I want to make you aware, the audience, that there is a whole, there's a broad research program on how to extend that. We are actually quite advanced on that. We call it the network asset valuation model, which is able to incorporate these previous models, but bring in also the insight that you get from uncertainty. And obviously, and finally, some of the important results are that more interconnectedness implies that you can have large errors, for instance, on the evaluation of systemic risk, arising from small errors which are inevitable on the parameters characterizing the individual contracts. You can have multiple equilibria. Actually, the area of multiple equilibria increases with the magnitude of the interconnectedness. In the presence of derivative, you can even have inconsistency of valuations. So these are all things that at the moment are currently neglected, but they are emerging actually in very good publications and have to be addressed. And so just one last sentence. So I wanted to say there is mounting empirical and mathematical evidence about the ambiguous role of financial complexity. So the old, the old narrative that tell us we shouldn't worry about financial complexity has to be questioned. There is really a lot of evidence that we should question. We shouldn't accept it as it is. The good news is that there are tools out there to monitor systemic risk and monitor financial complexity, but these are themes that have to start becoming, we need to demand that they are also looked at, they're also incorporating the discussion about quantitative easing, securitization, and potentially targeted quantitative easing versus towards green and sustainable